Greetings, YouTube. I saw an ad here on YouTube today, and it was for a Kickstarter. Somebody was going to be doing some sort of a monster book where they're trying to make the traditional bread and butter monsters of D&D, the ones that always show up in the first monster manual, more interesting. And from the description the guy was giving me, what he's talking about is creating sort of archetypes so that, like, instead of having just the standard, bog standard goblin, you're going to have the goblin cursor and the goblin warrior and the goblin archer. And it got me thinking about what I expect from a stat block. Now, I've discussed stat blocks here, and I think that the Pathfinder P1 version is my favorite because it's got the most complete stuff in it, though I do have a lot of respect for the streamlined appearance of 5th edition. It just lacks information. I think that is absolutely vital, like the size of the units, like how many show up, how many of them are there, their treasure, and their environment. Those are 3 pieces of information I think are key to any stat block. And when I'm looking at the stat block, whether it's a stat block for a monster from a monster manual, or like the traits for a species, if I'm looking at an ancestry reference, and I love ancestry references. I love looking at what people have come up with for different ideas for for player character options and non-player character options. Um, I think I'm looking for different things than he is, because the reality is I'm looking for the crunch. And I, in fact, rarely read the fluff. For the bog standard monsters, I know the fluff. I've been reading about those particular monsters in so many different versions of D&D and high fantasy games and low fantasy games, and I've been looking at monster manuals from so many systems over decades. Same thing with tech guides. I love tech guides. I own tech guides for games I don't even have, just because I love tech guides. Um, and when I'm looking at the stat block, unless there's something in it that I can't figure out, and P1 is very good at giving in a capsule little, bullet point description of what the powers and abilities of each creature are in their stat block, I don't really look at the fluff, the description. And let's take the bog standard goblin. Now, I tend to play goblins as subterranean species that does come to the surface and tends to raid in their traditional role. So these are goblins that are out in the world that have not been urbanized. Urbanized goblins are going to have a different life cycle, a different style than the natural, quote unquote, natural goblins that are found out in the world. Just as forest elves, the traditional elves with their living trees, and they use biotech in my games, and they don't use steel. They use a special type of elven bronze and things like that. Um, those are different from the urban elves, who are very much the fops. They use foils and pistols and things like that. Um, so urban goblins are different from the goblins that are living out in the subterranean environments of the world. Um, the traditional goblins, we'll call them. And if I'm using goblins, I got the stat block in front of me. And if the leadership doesn't have a stat block, a lot of the time they'll give you like a sergeant and like a chief or something like that when they have a description. But if they don't, it's not hard to say that, okay, the sergeant's going to have two times as many hit points as the mooks, and the chief's going to have 4. Boom, done. I need an archer. Cool. The archer is got a bonus to hit with a bow, or in my goblins tend to use slings because they're much more efficient underground, because they do take fewer resources to use. And let's face it, if you live underground, you don't have access to good wood, so slings are much easier to make. You can make them purely out of leather, so goblin snipers are using slings. They have a bonus to hit, and they're only 1 mook hits. So they're 1 hit mooks. Boom, done, dead. Whereas the standard warrior, meat and potatoes goblin is a 2 hit. And then the sergeants, I actually count hit points, and the chieftains, I actually count hit points. So there we go. I don't need a book that is particularly aimed at giving me deep and detailed descriptions of what I just said, because I can do that off the top of my head. Now, there will be sicker circumstances under which I will want to have a fleshed out Goblin character. Um, and there may be times when I want to have a really elite hit squad, and a lot of the times in that case, I'll just take the player character sheets, and I'll just make versions of them that are all goblins and throw them at the party, which always throws people off. Um, I don't need a book that is dedicated to exploring all the different possible options for goblins, because I think all of us can do that already. We know what a sniper is. We know what a trooper, the meat and potatoes goblin is. We know what a sergeant or a sub-chief. We know what a chief are. We know if they're the spellcaster. Yeah, the spellcaster may have to have a little bit more a little more fleshing out, but that's okay. I mean, that's not that difficult to do. Um, I just don't. I'm curious what other people are expecting from stat blocks. Do you consider the fluff, the description text of a creature's entry, to be as important as the crunch, the actual stat block itself, or the numbers are, where those numbers live? Do you consider those to be of equal weight, or do you, like me, consider the crunch to be significantly more important than the fluff? And I talk about on my channel many times about retooling creatures, making them have completely different backgrounds and things like that. And I do that because I know what their traditional backgrounds are. I've known them for decades. So I'm trying to come up with something new. And that's what I do for fun. Everything you see here is something I've thought of just for fun. That isn't that why we're interested in this kind of thing? We do it for fun. We come up with our own stuff. And I think that the game presents us in the monster manuals, like P1. P1's got, what, like 6 of them, I think? We have enough references to go with. And it's very easy to take anything and throw it at the party, and they're probably not going to recognize it. But if we need to tweak something a little bit, we can. I'm sure all of us have stripped off the description text completely and reused a stat block in a vastly different way. It's easy to do, and it saves you so much time. To me, the stat block is the turnkey aspect of the creature. That's the aspect that lets us just walk in, turn the key, and we go. And the paint on the walls, the descriptions and stuff, that's less important to me. So I'm intrigued to hear what you folks do. How do you use stat blocks? Do you consider the descriptive text to be of equal wall value? Do you consider it more important? Are you heavily into the narrative structure of monsters? Or do you think you just want to give me the numbers and I can figure out the rest of my stuff on my own? And if I feel I need to write things down beforehand, I will have written down things beforehand. But a lot of the time, I'm just going to have 6 goblins, and that's it. And if the players show me consistently that they're really good at taking out the mooks, the foot soldiers, I'll start throwing archers at them, snipers at them, so that they have to work for it a little. They're going to have their hit points whittled down a bit more before they finally get to them. So I don't know. I'm just curious. So let's talk about what we want out of stat blocks. Not necessarily with our favorite stat block. I've discussed that here already. No, what do we want out of those stat blocks? Do the stat blocks matter as much to you as the fluff? Do they matter more? Do they matter less? I want to know. I'm curious. Because I'm not back in this Kickstarter in question. I have no interest in this particular product. If there are other people out there that are interested, you go for it. And I hope they get funded. But yeah, it's not something that I see a big need for in my world. And I'm curious if you do.